Van Amsterdam was a baker of great renown. People would come for miles to buy his goods in Albany town. Oh, he made breads and cakes and muffins of every conceivable kind. But he had invented a pastry of his very own design. One day, as Van Amsterdam was rolling out his cookie dough in his bakery shop, he was thinking about his youth back in Holland before he came to the New World. When he was a little boy, his mother would bake gingerbread cookies in the shape of St. Claus, Santa Claus. Oh, he took out his knife and he cut the shape of a round, jovial man out of the dough. He put 2 raisins for eyes, a little walnut for a mouth, and after he baked his cookie creation, he decorated it with red and white icing so that it looked just like St. Nicholas, and he put the cookie in his shop's window. Well, a passerby came along, saw the cookie, and entered the shop, said, "Van Amsterdam, I haven't seen a cookie like that since I was a little boy back home in Holland. I want enough of those cookies to give one to every one of my 20 grandchildren." "Oh, well, sir, I've only made one. Come back later and you shall have as many as you like." Well, Van Amsterdam spent the rest of the day rolling out and cutting and baking and decorating his tasty cookies. Well, before long, everybody in town wanted some of his St. Nicholas cookies, and while they were in his shop, they bought his pies and cakes and muffins as well, and soon he prospered. He became quite rich. And one night, in the back of his shop, while he was counting out his money, a new thought occurred to him. Hmm, if I use just a little less butter, no one will know. If I use just one less egg, ha, they'll scarcely be able to tell. If I use just a little less honey, then there will be more money for me." And no one noticed. No one noticed when Van Amsterdam started to use just a little bit less of all of his fine quality ingredients in his baking. No one noticed because Van Amsterdam had become famous. People had stopped judging the quality of his goods, for his goods were now famous too. That's when it happened. One day, into his shop, there came an old woman with a long black shawl over her head. She lifted a gnarled finger and said, "Van Amsterdam, I've come to purchase 1 dozen of your famous St. Nicholas cookies." "Very well," said Van Amsterdam, and he filled a bag with exactly 12 of his finest cookies. He tied it round with a string and handed it to the woman. Well, she took the bag from him, and before she left the shop, she opened the bag and counted the cookies. "Woo! You've cheated me. Well, here's your coin, but you've only given me 12. You asked for 1 dozen, and 1 dozen is 12. 1 dozen means 13, and you are a greedy old man." Ooh, Van Amsterdam was a proud man. He did not like to be judged harshly by anyone, and so he said, "How dare you call me greedy? I am Volkart Jan Petersen van Amsterdam, the fine, the famous, and the honest baker. How dare you call me greedy? 1 dozen means 12 and not one more. How dare you call me greedy? Get out of my store." And he swept the old woman out the door. "Oh, oh, you'll be sorry for this rudeness, Van Amsterdam." The next day, when Van Amsterdam opened his ovens to take out his loaves, he was shocked to see that the loaves had risen so high in the oven he couldn't get them out. His pies, they were all sour. His cookies were so hard they couldn't be bitten. Everything he made that day came out wrong. "Oh, maybe I need more rest," he thought. "I'm overtired. Tomorrow it'll be better." But the next day it was no better. His breads were flat in the oven, and everything he made tasted terrible. Soon, people who came to his shop to buy his pies and cakes and cookies and muffins, well, they would fill their bag with treats and be scarcely on the road before their hand was in the bag, tempted to eat. Mmm, mm, mm. Well, now, it's well known, quite famous, but that didn't taste very good. And soon no one came to his shop. And Van Amsterdam sat in his store one day looking at his empty shelves, for with no customers he stopped baking. Now there was nothing left except a little pile of leftover St. Nicholas cookies. He wondered, how did my fortune go from so good to so bad? And that old man, he began to cry. Maybe it was the tear in his eye. But he looked over at that pile of St. Nicholas cookies, and it seemed like the mouth on one of them was moving. And he heard a voice. It said, "You'll never be rich, Van Amsterdam, because you're greedy. I'd have gone mad as well." And just at that moment, there came a knock at the door, and who do you imagine returned but that old woman wearing the long black shawl over her head? She lifted her gnarled finger and said, "I'd like 1 dozen of your famous St. Nicholas cookies." Very well. Wide-eyed and trembling, he took a bag and he put in exactly 12, and he handed it to the woman. But then he reconsidered and opened the bag and put in just one more. "Oh, well, thank you," she said, opening the bag and counting the cookies once again. "Thank you." Well, word went through the town. At Van Amsterdam's shop, 1 dozen means 13. Well, people started to come back. They were coming back to buy that baker's dozen. And when the customers returned, Van Amsterdam started to bake again. And this time he put an extra measure, more raisins, more nuts, more chocolate into everything he made. And before long, his shop prospered. Well, all the other bakers noticed the long lines in front of Van Amsterdam's store, so they too started to give 13 in 1 dozen. And that custom, well, it spread throughout the colonies, for the merchants had discovered a secret of success. When generosity replaces greed, good fortune follows. And soon in many a bakery store, 1 dozen meant 12, and then one more.